In this video, I've gathered for comparison the three main throwers available from Noctigon: the smooth and sleek KR1, the cheese grater DM11, and the uber beacon K1. All three lights are available with most of the same LED and driver options, but while in some areas they may overlap in performance, all three have distinct use cases. When trying to decide between the three lights, you should first consider your specific use case and how transportable the light needs to be. For something very small and easily carryable, an EDC light for a pocket or purse, the 18650 based KR1 is the ideal option. The head and body are curved and smooth, with a subtle texturing on the body tube, which makes the light very pleasant to hold and easy to pocket. This tail switch operated light has a flared head with a large reflector, and a single emitter that throws very well for its size. This is one of the very best throw-focused EDC flashlights you can get. If you want something which is portable, but with longer runtimes or more power, the Noctigon DM11 is an excellent choice. This light is powered by a 21700 or optional 26800 cell, and features a large TIR optic for long throw with a unique wide spill. There are RGB auxiliaries under the optic, and a large illuminated side switch. The knurling on the 21700 tube is very aggressive, which may be unpleasant for some, but it gives a very secure grip in the hand. The DM11 is great for extended outdoor usage, being easily carryable yet large enough for some serious throw. If size isn't much of an issue and you just want the maximum possible throw, the large K1 is the way to go. Also powered by a 21700 cell, it possesses a very wide and deep aluminum reflector that tightly focuses the light from its small LED, allowing it to cast a beam over a kilometer away. This easily illuminates objects at long distances and is still fairly ergonomic to hold and use. Unlike the other two, this light is really designed exclusively for long distance use. Its large head makes pocket carry impossible, and the extremely tight beam offers poor usability at close range. One unique feature found on the K1 is a USB-C charging port within the threads of the battery tube. Really, if you know how you want to use the light, the choice is pretty easy. The KR1 and DM11 have very similar performance, but one is smaller and easier to carry, while the other allows for more runtime and has a better beam for outdoor use. The K1 is much larger and is a dedicated super thrower for very long range use. Finally, if you're wondering about the DM1.12, it's basically a DM11, but with an extra channel of LEDs for use as a floodlight. In terms of both output and thermals, the exact performance is going to depend on the chosen LED, but all three lights are fairly comparable. My KR1 has an Osram CSLPM1, or W2, which produces over 1300 lumens on turbo, while my K1 has a larger CU-LPM1, or W2.2 LED. This LED is identical to the smaller W2, but has a larger thermal pad. In theory, this means it can handle more heat and sustain more output, but I actually find it to be a bit dimmer at 1100 lumens on turbo. This DM11 has the Luminus SBT90.2, which has a wider beam but doubles the output at 2200 lumens on turbo, providing about the same throw as the W2 does in the same host. As expected, the larger the light is, the more output can be sustained, as there is more physical mass for heat sinking. The KR1 sustains about 300 lumens, the DM11 350, and the K1 about 500 lumens. It's not a perfect comparison because of the different emitters, but this trend still reflects the difference in the overall designs. Of course, more than output, what matters for these lights is throw and general beam types, which again will be dependent on the chosen LED. In every case, LEDs with wider beams will provide more general usability and often higher output, while LEDs with tighter beams offer more overall throw and less heat, which translates to more sustained throw in turn. It's important to note that some LEDs, such as the B35 and XHP35 High, will come with different drivers. However, the choice of driver is secondary to the choice of LED in my opinion, so you shouldn't concern yourself too much with that. What you should know is that boost drivers are going to be a bit more efficient than the standard drivers, so you'll get a bit less heat and a bit longer runtimes. With its W2, the KR1 has an intensity of 78 candela per lumen and a maximum intensity of 107,000 candela. According to the ANSI FL1 standards, this will throw about 650 meters, which is really impressive for a small EDC style flashlight. The DM11's optic is slightly larger, allowing for a bit more throw with the same LED. This optic produces a beam with a much wider spill that gradually fades outwards, providing better area illumination. Here, the slightly floodier SBT90 produces 68 candela per lumen, but due to its higher output, it manages more peak intensity with 150,000 candela on turbo. Interestingly, both lights managed to sustain the same amount of usable throw, with 23,400 candela for the KR1 and 23,800 for the DM11. I also have the DM11 with the Cree XHP35 High, which produces 1600 lumens and 40 candela per lumen, with 64,000 candela at max. When combined with its wide floody spill, it makes for a great outdoor use beam that throws far without being too tight. The K1 is in a league of its own, being significantly more intense than the other two lights, with its W2.2 providing 550 candela per lumen and 600,000 candela at its peak. With a sustained level of 500 lumens, this light manages to maintain over 250,000 candela. This can theoretically throw over 1500 meters on turbo, and the sustained level will still punch out over a kilometer. All three lights are available with Osram NM1 and PM1 emitters, which will provide the most throw in any of the hosts. The Luminus SFT40 is a bit less intense, but will still throw far while being brighter than most other options. The Luminus SBT90.2 takes that to the extreme and provides extremely high output with a wider beam. Also available are the Cree XBL High and XHP35 High, which provide a more balanced and pleasantly colored beam. On the other end of the spectrum is the Nichia B35AM, a bit of an outlier that is relatively floody but produces a beautiful beam with accurate color rendering. For each of these lights, the Osram PM1 or W2 is a very good option. It manages to be both very bright and very throwy, while having good color and a nice daylight white beam. I also really enjoy the XHP35 High. It's brighter and less throwy, but much nicer to actually use in my opinion, as it has a wider and more usable beam with a pleasant neutral color. Those two LEDs are my favorite overall thrower options. Meanwhile, the SFT40 is an excellent performer, but is very cool and doesn't have great color, so it falls behind the other two for me. Finally, for absolute maximum throw, the Osram NM1 or W1 LEDs are extremely intense, especially in green, but I find their beams to be a bit too tight for most usage. I do think the W2 is better for the KR1 than the SFT40, as it has a warmer and more neutrally tinted beam, while the SFT40 is very cool and slightly greenish in comparison. The SFT40 gets hotter, which makes a bigger impact in the small KR1. For this light, I also think the XBL High is a great choice, as it provides good throw with a nice beam and is available in warmer colors. This light will also be available with a boost driver, which allows the XHP35 High to be used here as well. The SFT40 works nicely in the DM11, but again, I don't care for its very cool white beam with mediocre tint. However, the wider beam suits this light well for most use, and it still throws very far. The XHP35 High is even floodier and a bit dimmer, so it doesn't compare well in performance, but its pleasant 4000 K temperature and great color makes this my favorite thrower of the bunch. The K1 is extremely intense, and I think that the W1 or W2 are the best to take advantage of that huge reflector. The result will be a very thin pencil-like beam, which normally I would avoid, but if you want something with a wider and more usable beam, the DM11 is better for that anyways. I think it makes the most sense to max this light out for the most throw possible. Still, for a more usable beam, the XHP35 High or the SBT90.2 are both great options. The Cree should produce a beam around 250,000 candela, which is very respectable, and the SBT will be less intense per lumen, but will still throw far simply due to its massive output, with 420,000 candela on turbo. Finally, I have the DM11 with the B35AM as well, which produces 1600 lumens, though this one comes with a floodier optic that results in just 14 candela per lumen. Color rendering is fantastic, about as good as it gets, but it's hardly a thrower, so not super relevant to this comparison. This LED will also be available in the KR1 though, which does seem like a great option. I do love the Luminus SBT90.2, it's an efficient and powerful LED with a usable beam, but it's very expensive and not ideal if maximum throw is your goal, as it has a relatively wide beam and gets very hot on turbo. It adds an extra $50 to any light, and in my opinion, it's entirely too much for the small KR1, which doesn't have enough thermal mass to sustain the incredible output from this emitter. Still, if maximum fun is the goal, then it's a great choice for any of these lights. Ultimately, the choice of LED is very subjective, and it's hard to go wrong with any of them. The best LED to pick is going to depend on your own wants and needs. To narrow down your decision, I recommend looking around for more information on the different options on the subreddits rFlashlight and rHanklights, which have very active and helpful communities with tons of information on these different lights. So between all of these lights, which are my own favorites? Personally, I like the DM11 the best of this bunch. It just makes the most sense for me, being a mid-size light that is easy to carry yet still has plenty of power. As a thrower, my favorite option is the XHP35 High, which I find super pleasant to use at night with its warm and neutral beam. The throw is not as impressive as the other options, but it's still plenty enough to reach far into the darkness, and the spill from the TIR optic illuminates a wide area, which makes it great to use outside. If you're interested in this light, I have a review coming that explores it in more detail. It has a great starting price of about $60. The KR1 is nice, but I find it slightly awkward to carry because of its large head, and as a result, it doesn't fill my own needs that well. Still, it's really nice to hold, and I do like the tail switch. The performance is impressive for such a small light, and despite its size, it doesn't feel like a compromise in use. The KR1 also starts at $60, which I think is an excellent value. The K1 is kind of weird in my opinion. While the throw is incredible, it's not a super useful light. It's not bad to carry, but the form factor is pretty awkward. The head is huge and a bit unbalanced. I think a triple cell configuration would make way more sense for this light. Because the beam is so tight, it's not really useful for much that I would need a flashlight for, so it's basically just a fancy toy. That being said, while I may not need to use it for anything, it's very fun to play around with. At $100, it too offers excellent value and provides just about the most throw you can get for the money. As good as all these lights are, there are plenty of other excellent throwers on the market that are worth considering as well. However, Noctigon and Emisar flashlights remain unique for their combination of build quality, performance, customizability, and especially value. If you have any interest in these lights, I highly recommend trying them out. I purchased both of these DM11s myself, while the KR1 and K1 were sent to me by Jackson Lee, who sells them at jlhawaii808.com. I highly recommend purchasing from his store. You can also purchase these from internationaloutdoor.com, which I highly recommend as well. And with that, that is the end of this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below and I will be happy to help you out. And yeah, that's all. See you in the next one.